Hi, welcome to GABL. You're listening to our very first episode, so bear with us as we work out some of the kinks. Today's episode is going to be about Coca-Cola and a little bit of Pepsi-Cola, some other stuff too. So have a listen, tell us what you think. We appreciate the feedback and enjoy the episode.
So I think it's an interesting discussion. I'd like to discuss the invention of Coca-Cola
Okay, yeah.
with you. I know you kind of mentioned that earlier to me this afternoon, and in really researching it over the last 4 to 5 hours. What an interesting.
It's a great story.
It really is. It truly is. I'm curious just what you've learned and the things that you've come up with regarding it and kind of the things that stood out to you.
Well, a couple things. When I was researching it, I found out that, well, there's a lot of cool things they did to build their brand. For one thing, after it was reacquired, because the original guy, he got real sick really early on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the thing I thought was most interesting about the way he made it was he used something, was it caramel oil or caramel coloring?
Yes, caramel coloring
Yeah.
and flavored oil.
So
yes.
caramel coloring to hide the imperfections in the whatever, the syrup, but at the same time, the guy used to be a snake oil peddler, so he used caramel coloring because he used it to make his snake oil. And they still use it.
It's amazing to me that they would still use it to make it the dark brown so you can't see what's in it.
That's nuts.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah, it is. I don't drink Coke or Pepsi. I haven't for a long time, but man, that is interesting.
In my research, I found a very interesting line regarding John Pemberton, which I don't know if you heard this but he did not go to medical school. He was Dr. John Pemberton.
Okay.
He did not go to medical school.
So he just said, "Hey, I'm
he
a doctor."
bought his
Wow.
degree for $5
Well, what is
from
this?
a medical school in Georgia.
Yeah, but what is this, like 18?
This would have been
1880?
probably in the 1860s.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
back then, nobody cared. Oh, you're a doctor.
Yeah. So, anyways,
Take my money.
He was a pharmacist, and something that I just thought was so he was in the Civil War. He was fighting for the Confederacy,
Okay, right.
and
Is that where the red comes from, the red logo?
Actually, probably.
That's
there's
probably
probably
not
a
true.
little. I'm not exactly sure.
That might not be true, so don't
Yes, I'm
boycott
not-
Coca-Cola because they're Confederate.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure on that, but I know they are based in Atlanta. But before that, in April of 1865, this was what was so interesting to me. He was defending the city of Columbus,
Okay.
and it was the last stand. What he did not know is that General Robert E. Lee had already signed the surrender at Appomattox.
Okay, yeah, well, yeah, I've heard stories about this very situation. I didn't know John Pemberton?
Pemberton, yes.
So I did not know he was involved in this.
Yes, so he was actually he was leading a brigade of cavalry officers in the last stand defending Columbus. And so the Union soldiers were coming up over a bridge, and nobody had gained word or got word that Robert E. Lee had already signed the surrender. So they're still fighting.
Okay, right.
So, but the
Naturally.
war is over.
Yeah.
Even though they're still fighting. And so the Union soldiers crossed the bridge to take Columbus. As they crossed the bridge to take Columbus, him and his brigade, they charge, I don't even know if you'd call it a brigade, but a group of cavalry officers charged the Union soldiers, and Dr. John Pemberton is blown off of his horse. He's shot.
What?
And so as he's laying there on the ground, a Union soldier comes up, and not to be indiscreet or gross, but takes his bayonet and bayonets him and stabs him in the abdomen. And one of the lines in the research that I found that was so interesting to me was that day was a day that would not change the war, but it would change the world.
Wow, because he
And
survived.
because he survived,
He got ran through
he
with a
got
bayonet.
ran through. He was actually laying there. One of his fellow officers, from my understanding, dragged him out. They ended up stitching him up, and he would live. As he was living, he became addicted to morphine
Right.
due to the fact of his injury.
Right. And that went on for what, like 30 years or something? He was on
For
morphine.
an additional 23 years.
You know, that story reminds me of the president that got shot with a musket. He was dueling someone else, and they shot him. And back then, a duel, you could only shoot one shot. But this guy, who was he? I thought he was a president. His name will come to me. He might not have been president. But anyway, he gets shot in the chest, and so the duel's over because they each fired a shot. But he missed the other guy. So he reloads his gun and shoots the other guy and kills him. And that's murder, basically. Andrew Jackson. That's who it was.
Wow.
He had a musket ball in his chest till the day he died. They couldn't get it out. And that's what killed him. The lead or whatever poisoned him.
Wow.
Means
Well, that's in turn what kind of got him to begin working on some of these concoctions, and that's not completely, even though he was a pharmacist and he was trying to come up with a cure for headaches, but that is
was that the original intention? Was to okay? No, you're right. That's right. That's what it was. It was. What did he call it when he first made it? He called it French wine Coca. Right?
Yes, French wine Coca. That's exactly it. Yeah. And then that to me is interesting because French wine Coca, the whole reason why he took the wine out of it, it had red wine in.
Right.
And he was afraid, the South, this was long before, this was in the 1880s. And even though the national prohibition movement was not yet, that would not come till the early 1900s.
Yeah, at this point, there were activist groups.
That's exactly
Right.
it. But the South, many counties in the South began to become what they call dry cities, or so they would
going dry.
eliminate,
right.
going dry. And so that's why he took the red wine out of the formula, is because he was afraid that the temperance movement was going to cause him to where he couldn't sell it for pharmaceutical purposes.
Well, that's interesting because even during Prohibition, he had no idea of knowing this, but during Prohibition, you could still be prescribed alcohol.
Yes, but he didn't realize that and didn't know it. So that's how he.
Plus, he wasn't a real doctor, so
This is true. So that's how he began to pull away from using the red wine and was still using the other ingredients. That is just amazing to me.
Yeah.
I mean, could you imagine?
So
Go ahead.
So what I heard was once he removed the wine, he still wanted people to be return customers, people to be addicted to it. So he added caffeine at that very same time.
Okay, well, he did. And how he added caffeine was via the cola nut, spelled Kola, not Cola.
Okay.
And when you add the cola nut, that's where you get immense amounts of caffeine. So he was adding tremendous. He took out the
so
wine.
I could just order some cola nuts and I would no longer be addicted to coffee.
That's it, man. If you just order cola nuts, you'll be bouncing off the walls.
Okay, that's what I'll do.
There you go. Yeah. So he mixed in the cola nut, but the cola nut is known to be extremely bitter.
Oh,
And so that's when he had to add literally just vast amounts of sugar.
So I'll just cover it in chocolate and I'll get cola nuts.
There you go. Cola nuts and chocolate, and you're all good to go.
I've never even heard of cola nuts.
Yeah, a cola nut, they say, extremely bitter. And that's another interesting story, too. He actually the cola nuts that he experimented with, he actually bought off of
Snake oil guy?
it was actually a ship goer that was trading. He was a tradesman with Africa, and so he got these trees. The cola nut comes from Africa, and so he got this guy to give him some cola nuts. But from my understanding, it was almost like contraband.
Well, yeah, that's funny because that's the same deal with coffee beans. Coffee beans only grew in one place, and it was illegal to export them. and then someone snuck them out and started growing them on like this island. Actually, I think it was the island. The island name was Java, so that's where Java gets its name from. Is an
I'd
island.
always been curious.
And then there's this other place that's called, the other place it was exported to is a place called Mocha. And there's literally places called, to this day, Java and Mocha. And that's where coffee gets its name from. Like today, Mocha means like chocolate, and Java just means coffee. But yeah, that's where they get their names from, is places they were exported to
That's interesting.
and regrown.
So what's really kind of, after he did all of this formulation and everything, what's interesting to me that I was like, wow, is that he ended up forming his own chemical company. Now, mind you, this was all for pharmaceutical reasons, is why he was producing this concoction. And so he ended up forming a chemical company. And it was a chemical company that actually invented Coca-Cola.
Wow. So that's really interesting, because he had this concoction called French wine Coca, and it was addictive because it was alcohol, right? People would come in, they say, oh, well, I feel different, or
Yes.
I can't think of my problem right now, so things must be better, or whatever their feeling is, right? I guess.
I have that problem too, but I don't do it. It's not via wine. I just can't think.
Oh, there we go. It's like, oh, if you don't have a mind, they say mind over matter, but if you don't have a mind, it doesn't matter, right?
This is true. Second grade was the best 3 years of my life. But anyways, go ahead.
So he takes away the wine, adds the caffeine to keep people addicted, and has a chemical factory plant, whatever it is. He's a chemist now. He probably paid $5 for his chemist certificate. Became a chemist to find another fancy way to get people addicted. Now, what was the next step? What happened after that? Because at some point they had to remove the cocaine, right?
Okay, so that's interesting. So yes, he was mixing, basically. It was a scary concoction. He was mixing cocaine and wine. Then he took the wine out and added the cola nuts.
Okay.
And then he added sugar, and then he added several other items too. He had the cola nuts, the cocoa leaves, sugar. He had this flavored oil that had orange, lemon, cinnamon, and nutmeg, among other things. And then he added citric acid and that caramel coloring that you were talking about. And then they mixed it with soda water. And he got the formula all dialed in. Once he got it all dialed in, a man came. I guess he was producing this in small quantities and giving it out to soda fountains, or the places. It was basically every pharmacy, kind of every drugstore had a little place where you could eat ice cream, or something like that.
And they had like carbonation taps.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he was. So he gave it to, I believe the man's name was like Wembley or something like that, and he was asking him to try it on his customers and see how they liked it. And after he had perfected that formula, he was refining it in his basement one day, and a guy knocked on the door, and the guy said, "Hey," his name was I want to say Frank Robinson. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what his name was, Frank Robinson. He knocks on the door of his basement. He says, "Hey, I hear you have something, that helps along. I believe it helps headaches." And so he said, "I do. I just actually mixed this brand new formula. It's still here in the pot." He took a spoon of it and gave it to this Mr. Robinson. And Mr. Robinson took it and fell in love with it and asked him, "Look, this was so wonderful. Would you allow me to partner up with you in business?" And that Mr. Robinson had just come from Maine, and his sole purpose in coming to Atlanta was to start a marketing business. So he said, "If you'll allow me to become your partner, you can do the chemical side of things, and I'll do the marketing side of things." And so that's where...
and so he agrees, or...
He agrees,
okay.
yes. So he agrees, and then after he agrees... They got to have a name. They don't know what name they're going to name it. And so this Mr. Robinson went to Dr. Pemberton and said,
marketing
"Listen,"
entrepreneur, right?
Yes, and he said, "Listen," he said, "if we've got to come up with a name, I've come up with one. What about naming it? You use the Coca plant, and you use cola nuts. What about we take the K for cola nuts and turn that into a C, and call it Coca-Cola.
Wow.
And that's where Coca-Cola got its name.
It's named from its two main ingredients. Or
Yes.
maybe not main ingredients, but two of its ingredients. That's really good.
The other interesting thing, and we could go on for hours
this
about
is-
this part, but
At this time, it's like 1890 or something.
yes, I believe it was
Wow.
like 18 in the 1880s of some sort.
Well, everything
yes.
was really wordy back then. They were very wordy. It was like, guaranteed to grow hair on doorknobs. They were just had all these phrases. The radio people were very not. I guess there was. What was the first radio broadcast? Was it 1906?
Yeah, it would have been later. So all of it had to be done. All their
But people
advertising
were
was
fast
done.
talkers because you had the snake oil peddlers, you had the people the traveling salesmen. They were just very fast talkers. They could outpace these people, and they said, "Oh, all right, and it must be good. This guy's telling me all these good things about it."
Yeah, well, a few years a few years after its conception as Coca-Cola is when Dr. Pemberton died. So he dies, I believe it was 23 years after his, and I believe it was 1888 or 1878. Had to be 1888.
It must have been 1880. Yeah, couldn't have been earlier.
He passes away around that time. And so basically 23 years after his injury.
Wow.
And Coca-Cola basically went out of business. It was still out there, but it wasn't being mass produced. It was just, they would make it up here and there. And but what's interesting is the man that would end up running the company for years, he also had a headache. And his brother had told him about this Mr. Robinson and how Mr. Robinson had just sang its praises of this headache healer. And so one day he had a splitting headache, and so he walked down to the nearest soda fountain, and he asked the guy for Coca-Cola. The guy happened to have some, gave him some, and when he tasted it, he fell. It cured him of his headache.
Wow.
The ingredients caused his headache to go away, and
Yeah.
so he wrote his brother and said, "Because of this, I'm going to invest my money in it." And he actually became the founder of the Coca-Cola company.
Yeah, they didn't know this. They couldn't have known this then, obviously, but it's really just the caffeine that's taking care of their headaches.
That's
But
exactly
they
right.
They had no
Yes.
idea. They just knew, hey, because this is just after snake oil, or probably during snake oil still going on.
Yes.
So they had these crazy concoctions that come up. All they knew was, hey, it works, so okay, must be fine.
That's right.
So
And
take
so
care of my
this-
headache. That's what matters.
This Mr. Robinson, who had sang all the praises and who had, knocked on the door of Dr. Pemberton and all of this, he actually gets hired by this man who would eventually become the founder of
The
the Coca-Cola
opportunist that
company. Yes.
Just happened to spend the money.
And that man is the one that actually ended up founding coupon marketing.
Yeah. Okay. No, I did read about that. So, or actually, no, I heard it on a podcast. Actually, where it was unheard of to have coupons where you're giving away a product for free.
Exactly.
So they didn't. The marketer guy, he's like, you know what? Here's what can happen. We can give it away for free in the form of coupons. They take the coupons into the soda fountain, get a free Coca-Cola, and they'll be hooked. They'll be addicted because it'll cure their headache. It's super sweet. So it had two great addictive properties to it. It was a lot of sugar and caffeine.
Yes. Well, and don't forget,
Oh, at this
cocaine
time,
at that
it had
time
cocaine.
was still in
Yeah,
it as
that's
well.
true.
Which this opportunist, the gentleman that ended up founding Coca-Cola, he's the one that realized we've got to do away with the Coca plant.
That's right. Yeah, because he was raised a
Methodist.
Methodist.
Yes.
Okay, so he was
Yes.
raised Methodist. So he's like, you know what? I don't want to be associated with this drug. This is crazy. So that's when he used that chemical, the chemical part of the company, whatever it was, the chemical plant, whatever it was.
Yes.
He used them to remove all traces of cocaine from the coca leaf, but he still wanted to use the coca leaf so he could keep the name.
That's right. Yeah, and in fact, I believe they had to use it at first to establish, or not to establish, but to protect their trademarks.
See, I've heard this. I haven't read it anywhere. In looking this up earlier today, I didn't read anywhere where it was still used today. But I've heard people say that the cocaine leaves, the coca plant is still used without the cocaine.
Okay, so I looked it up as well, and I saw one thing that said that it was not. However, Coca-Cola's ingredient formula is secret. It's one of the most guarded secrets in all of
Secret recipe.
corporate. Yeah, it's between that and Colonel Sanders' Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Yeah, 11 herbs and spices.
Yeah, I mean nobody knows. So
there's only 11 of them. I mean, it can't be that hard to figure out. 11 herbs and spices. Come on, how many herbs and spices could there have been when Colonel Sanders?
Exactly. You would think there's a chemist out there that could figure it out somewhere somehow. But
reverse engineer that.
Yeah, the same thing with Coca-Cola. You would think that they would be able to figure it out, and I know that they can get it close. Which brings me to the point that is the coca plant still used? They say it's not, but
I guess
who
we'll
really
never
knows?
know. Yeah. You know what's interesting about this? This is today. Today, there's all these knockoff brands of Coca-Cola. So I haven't drank soda for probably 12 years, but back when I used to drink soda, there's Shasta Cola. There's all these little off
RC
brands
Cola,
that taste, in my opinion, very similar to Coca-Cola.
Mm-hmm.
All these off brands, RC Cola, Shasta Cola, but Pepsi. There's no Pepsi. There's no generic form of Pepsi. There's just Pepsi. You got like 4 or 5 different things that taste like Coca-Cola, but nothing that tastes like Pepsi.
I think so much of that perhaps has to do with the fact that Coca-Cola was first, and it was the king of the Coca-Cola industry for so many years that it became the standard that everybody was shooting for.
They do dominate.
At one point in the 60s and 70s, they were selling 6-1
Wow.
over Pepsi. Now Pepsi ended up outselling them, I believe, in the mid 80s. From the mid 80s to the mid 2000s, Pepsi became the greater purchased product.
I think what they did at that time is started paying celebrities, like pop stars, like Michael Jackson. Or
they
whoever.
did, yes. Michael Jackson, Ray Charles, Britney Spears.
Right. Paying them to be in their advertising.
Yeah,
people
and
are like, oh, well, I like this person, so I'm going to like their drinks too.
And some of the biggest catchphrases that I remember growing up as a child came from their marketing campaigns. The choice of a new generation.
Oh, really?
That was that was some of their slogans that came from those ad campaigns with those celebrities.
Well, you know what's interesting about the Coca-Cola and Pepsi situation is later on, about this time, one of Pepsi's ad campaigns, because they were dumping money into advertising. Once they paid the celebrities and they had the return from that, their next investment was this advertising, I think in the 90s, called the Coke and Pepsi Challenge, where they would take a blind test of Coke and Pepsi and see which one people chose. And people almost every time chose Pepsi. Well, Coke was furious when they saw this. They said, this is whatever it is, slander or made up, this can't be right. So they did their own blind test, and the same thing happened.
Oh, wow.
It was like 9 out of 10 people choosing Pepsi over Coke. So that's when Coke, no, this is in the 80s. That's when Coke decided to change their recipe, make it taste better.
Oh, okay.
And it was almost unanimous. Everyone agreed it tasted better within the company, right? And then they had these people come in, and they started doing their blind taste test with all these random strangers, the new Coke versus Pepsi, and they were picking the new Coke. So they finally had a recipe that tasted good. So they released it to the public and say, we got the Coca-Cola new flavor, but there was outrage and backlash from all the hardcore Coca-Cola fans. No, we want the original flavor back. So for a short time, it was only a few weeks, and they buckled under the pressure of all the backlash.
Okay,
so they came out with Coca-Cola Classic, and they ran them parallel. They still had Coca-Cola Classic and the new flavor.
New Coke, okay.
But after it wasn't very long. It was after a couple years they quit making the new Coke, and now it's just, that's why every Coke can you see says Coca-Cola Classic.
Interesting. Now, is it true that the president of PepsiCo Corporation got word that this Coca-Cola was coming out, the new flavor, the new ingredients or whatever, the new recipe that was coming out? Is it true that he got that info from a insider at Coke named Mr. X?
I don't know.
And that he found out 4 days before they were going to release this as a surprise press conference. Had you heard this?
No, I didn't read that.
Okay, so yeah, I could be wrong on this, but from my understanding, he got a call from an inside informant that he had put in the Coke company.
That's cool. I'd like to be that guy getting paid from Pepsi and Coke.
That's right. Yeah. And so he called the president. I can't remember his name, but the president of Pepsi Cola, and he said, "Listen, there's something big happening in 4 days. It was going to be on a Tuesday. They are going to be releasing something." And he ended up going to several other insiders and people within the Coca-Cola community and finding out that they were releasing a surprise brand new recipe. So the day that they were going to release it, he mind you, the internet was not at this point. This was in the 80s, so there was no internet. So your basic mode of communication via media was either television or newspaper. Newsprint at that point was huge. And so he took out a huge ad in all of the major newspaper places like the New York Times, and basically the ad simply said they blinked, meaning Coca-Cola is getting whooped by us and our formula, and they blinked. And so, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it was also a pride thing. Here's this company they said, there's no way people are choosing Pepsi over Coke, and they were furious. But when they did the test themselves and people chose Pepsi over Coke in the blind test, it really hurt their pride. Like, we got to change our recipe. People don't like it.
Yes.
People don't like the flavor. But what they didn't realize, and when they realized after they changed the flavor, is people were loyal to the brand more than they cared about the better flavor.
That makes total sense. And what's interesting to me is that when Pepsi put out that ad, they blinked. That came out the morning of their press conference. So the press was buzzing over the fact that basically Pepsi revealed Coke's new recipe before Coke did.
That's funny.
And then at the press conference, they just basically ate up the president who was doing this press conference, and then he got out of it, answered all their questions, basically lied, said no, it wasn't because Pepsi's better, it's just we found this due to our creation of Diet Coke.
Very well may have asked, hey, is this in response to the blind Pepsi challenge, or
from my understanding they did.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And he basically, oh no, we found this when we were creating Diet Coke.
Oh, wow.
Which is a total lie. And so they took all the press out, and they had all this new formula of Coke poured in cups with ice, sitting there for the press to try. The problem is they had put that Coke with the ice on the tables, poured it into those cups over an hour before.
Oh, so it went flat.
So it went flat. All the ice had melted and watered this new Coke
and it's
down.
Diluted.
So right from the get-go, Pepsi had a leg up. Pepsi is the one that actually revealed their new recipe. And then when the press all tried it, they said some of them even spit it back in the cup because it was so gross to them.
What a disaster.
So right from there, they had a disaster marketing-wise.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's really unfortunate.
Yeah, it's interesting. But I think the overall idea of this that I learned from it was that you will you never know where one thing leads to another. I mean, think about it. A pharmaceutical invention that leads to a chemical, that leads to a soda fountain, that leads to a company, that leads to a guilty pleasure, that leads to an addiction, that leads to a $360 billion a year industry.
It is crazy. It is crazy. And it all came from a guy who paid for a fake medical license.
Yeah, fake medical license. So you know what you need to do?
I need to get my fake medical license.
There
That's
you
what I
go,
need to
man.
do. Yeah.
And don't forget about me when you come into your
Sign me
kingdom.
up, man. I'm going to fake medical license and invent something that people get addicted to that's legal.
Yes, yes.
Caffeine's already a thing, though.
We'll have to figure out something else.
Well, that was really interesting. So, man, I think we should wrap it up, and we'll pick this up another time. We'll find a topic. I don't know. Maybe we'll do energy drinks or whatever is interesting. We'll figure out something that we'll talk about. This was fun, though.
I've enjoyed it, and I'm going to look forward to our listeners getting to hear more as we discuss anything under the sun.
Yeah, let's hear it. We can take suggestions for sure. We'll see what the response is, and we'll go from there. Anyway, guys, that's it.
Adios.